Welcome to the HR Think Tank, our podcast that uncovers the power a trusted workforce has on team performance, culture, and morale. We gather insights from experts, business leaders, and HR professionals to help you lead your team more effectively. Here's your host, Kai No, CEO of Verify Now, a trusted provider of background screening services.
We're living in an age of exponential digital growth, innovation, and opportunity. But is there fair access to this new economy for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? Our guest today is Liam Ridgeway, co-founder of NGNY and Indigitek, who's not just talking the talk about the Indigenous digital economy, but is out there making things happen. Liam is passionate about supporting the sustainability and enhancement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture through the influence and use of technology, as well as running a 100% indigenous-owned digital agency in NGNY. Liam is also active in consulting with government bodies like the Australia Council for the Arts and by increasing the participation and success of Indigenous people in the tech industry. Welcome to the HR Think Tank, Liam. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, Liam, before we kick things off, can I just get you to do some introduction and just give us some of the cultural protocols, and then we'll talk about some of those items specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Liam Ridgeway. On my dad's line, I'm Aboriginal. On my dad's line, I'm Gumbaynggirr and Dungari. So I'm from the north coast of New South Wales, so known as Guris. So in the context of Australia, so you might hear about Kuris, Guris, Murris, Noongas, Nungas, Yolngu people. So different locations have, different labels or names, essentially for groups of people. So on my dad's line, I'm a Guri. On my mum's line, I'm Murri. So Murri people are from Queensland. And I'm Gullalli, so from the Gullalli Nation, which is out western Queensland towards the South Australian Northern Territory border. Yeah. And then I'm from the Waka Waka people as well, which is a place called Cherbourg, which is a place of many nations as well. And that's in southeast Queensland, about 3 hours northwest of Brisbane. And that's quite an interesting one in terms of like historically, a lot of different nations and clans were brought into Cherbourg, and it was essentially a mission. And it's a predominantly Aboriginal town. So, but I've always grown up on Gadigal country. So I've spent probably 95% of my life on Gadigal country, but I was born on Biripi country, which is Forster in northern New South Wales, and then moved to Sydney to Gadigal country, but then spent time on Bundjalung country as well, up in Tweed Heads. Went to school there for a little while, and then also on Gumbaynggirr country as well in Sawtell, just south of Coffs Harbour. So mostly Gadigal, but I've moved around a little bit through my journey.
And you know what we'll do? We'll actually link to the Aboriginal map of Australia. I think IATSIS was the one that produced this a number of years back, but we'll produce it. We'll share it in the link, because today we're recording in North Parramatta on the land of the Darug people. So it's great to have you on the show. And, you and I have had many interesting conversations in the past, but today we've got you on to talk, about the Indigenous digital economy. But before we talk about that, I just want to go through some cultural protocols. I think it's helpful to cover some of these topics or some of these questions that listeners may have. For those that are less aware, I think it'll be really helpful. For those that who have attended and are more culturally aware, it's still a good reminder. So if you want to just, if I can just ask you first, what is a welcome to country, and what's the difference with an acknowledgement of country, and why do you think we're seeing more of it at public events?
Yep. Yeah, so I guess to answer the first question, so the welcome to country is a traditional welcoming by the traditional owners of the land that people are meeting on or gathering on. So typically people who are traditional owners will be descendants of that particular location. So I'm a descendant of the Gumbaynggirr people. I'd be able to do a welcome to country on Gumbaynggirr country to welcome other people onto that country. There's still a rite of passage because I haven't lived on Gumbaynggirr country most of my life. I'd still have to go through a rite of passage to be able to do that. So it's not like I can just say, well, because I'm Gumbaynggirr, I can go in and do a welcome to country. But I'd have to get that acknowledgement from my family, my community, my elders to be able to do that. And then an acknowledgement of country is a recognition of being able to talk about that you acknowledge that you are on the lands of a particular group. That acknowledgement doesn't need to be done by an Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander person. That can be done by anyone who is comfortable in that space. So what we often do is encourage non-Indigenous people, non-Indigenous Australians to be able to feel comfortable to do acknowledgement. So occasionally I'll be in a space and someone like, oh, hey, would you like to do the acknowledgement? I'm like, actually, I think it's important for you to be able to do it and start to feel comfortable to be able to do that. And it's really, really great. And I guess to the last question around seeing so many more people doing acknowledgements and also recognizing welcome to countries, there is an increased understanding and desire to want to learn more and be involved in those protocols. And those protocols typically happen because historically, where I'm from, there's meeting places and different clans used to come into the meeting places. So on Gumbaynggirr country, we used to have Dungari people visit country, Bundjalung people and Gamilaroi people, and they would come into that space, including sometimes Biripi and Worimi, and then so there's a welcoming that happens, in that space. Absolutely. Well, and I can even talk to this as it relates to. So more so, I guess an interesting fact is that my wife, she's half Aboriginal, half Papua New Guinean, and they have similar welcoming protocols. When we're up in Papua New Guinea and being welcomed and being allowed to walk in a space. And so you see a lot of commonality within that, and I guess when you look at Papua New Guinea, it's like Aboriginal Australia, Torres Strait Islands and Papua New Guinea. So, there is a lot of like cultural connection and similarities between our cultures. But I guess going back to, your first question, the reason why there's such a drive as well to be able to want to connect and learn is, I guess you can see, an evolution in society with more people being able to connect and understand with Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. I grew up in the city of Sydney, and for me there was a lot of connecting with people of all different backgrounds, so having that connection, but them being exposed to me and my culture, that was something that became normalized, whereas historically, and still in some parts of the country, there was more like segregation, and so there wasn't necessarily a desire to do that.
I think it's amazing, the journey that we're on at the moment. I think we've still got a long way to go. It's a big part of our country's identity, and like you said, historically, it was something that was not allowed to be spoken about. Certainly was not celebrated. And I think we've got a lot of ground to make up for that. I was saying to you earlier that I went to, public school in Southwest Sydney, and when I went to school, all of our house colours were Aboriginal names. When I've spoken to other people, they had red, yellow, green, blue, typical colours, but our colours were always Aboriginal names. So, I was in the house of Eora, and I've always known that. And we had a big mural across different sections of our schools. I think my principal must have been, ahead of his time, because now, it's almost an expectation, and it's great to see. I'm so happy that we're doing it more. Like, how does it feel for you, seeing that Australia is embracing reconciliation more?
It makes me feel good about seeing the progress that's being made, I guess over the years, and knowing what some people from my community historically have been able to do just to allow us to even get to the point where we are today. In my community, there would be some people who would challenge it and say that it's not enough. But for me, I recognize that, and it's purely my opinion and my perspective, that it's a journey, and I see this journey, making strides. And I'm not saying that, we're anywhere near the finish line, but I think that there's a huge opportunity to continue to push down this path, and we're going on that right trajectory to continue to do this. And I'll walk into a space now and people will, ask me about, where I'm from. Like a non-Indigenous person will ask me, where I'm from, and I think, that's important. Or they'll talk about the acknowledgement, or they'll say, oh yeah, we've got a meeting. Oh, by the way, we're going to the Gadigal room, and so they, similar to your experience at school, the meeting rooms now have, names that are Aboriginal names of, the local Gadigal nation. So
I just think it's so important for us to move ahead. We actually need to recognize and embrace our history, our full history, not just, our Western civilization history that's been 200 plus years, but we've got so much more. And when I talk to my colleagues who work in international diplomacy or business, I'm like, Australia's got a bigger identity, and once we embrace our full identity, we actually have a lot of uniqueness and strength to build from that. And when we do that, when we can reconcile with who we actually are, then we'll figure out who we want to be, and we can go down that path. Because I feel like there's this, there's been this friction that we haven't overcome yet. And there is right now, we won't go into the details, but right now there are those political debates around how we move forward with reconciliation.
Yep, I completely agree. And I think, there's the whole conversation around, closing the gap, and it's been a government policy for so many years. And I think there's one thing that I often talk about as well as, there's a gap on both sides. So there's a gap around obviously lifestyle, like, living standards, like health, education, etc. That things that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, are addressing through, government policy and things like that. But there's the opposite side as well, which is how is non-Indigenous Australia also learning to understand about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and to go on actually that shared journey, because it's kind of like saying, well, how do we meet in the middle, instead of saying, well, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people need to move all the way over here just to kind of close that gap. So I think there's quite a big opportunity in that. In fact, the way that I would look at it, if I even tie it back to work, is its user experience. It's like how do you actually build something where people actually want to come and use it, and then so you actually have this shared journey to get to this point where all parties who are involved in this get to that point where they want to achieve something, a common outcome.
Well, we're going to explore that a lot more. I just want to ask you one last thing before we move into talking about the Indigenous digital economy in great detail, is around, labels, terms. So when people are looking at print or media, you'll hear Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, you'll hear Indigenous, you'll hear First Nations. What's the best approach in terms of, which label to use when addressing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? So, give us a basic rundown of this.
Yeah, so I guess that there isn't necessarily what I would say one best approach, because what will happen is with different audiences, different people, they will have a different perspective or definition of what they would like to be referred to. But originally, I'll put it this way: as I was growing up, I grew up being Aboriginal, and then when I was in primary school, and then when I get to high school, all of a sudden I'm Indigenous. And then now that I'm, in my working environment, I'm all of a sudden First Nations now. And so it's like this evolution of terminology. And, for me, it's I will talk about it, and I'm not for or against any of those terms personally, in my opinion. But I will also say to someone, I'm Aboriginal, but I'm from these nations, and I'll talk about where I'm from. And so for me, yes, my Aboriginality is about my connection to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people all across the nation, but then I define it down to culturally where I'm from. So then that says, this is where, and like ancestrally, this is where my people are from. This is who I'm connected with. This is my family lineage and whatnot. And I think in our community as well, because we're such tight-knit communities, we have big families as well. And so understanding lineage and where you fit is a really important thing. And actually, I'll give you an example. Yesterday I was had a quick lunch break between work, and I was up the street, and this young Aboriginal guy said to me, he goes, "Oh, do you have a couple of dollars?" I was like, "Yep, I'm just going to grab some food." I'll grab some food for him as well. And I gave him a couple of dollars, and I was like, and this is what we say when we meet the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. "Oh, where's your mob from?" Yeah. And he said, "Oh, I'm from Cherbourg." And I was like, and I turned around and said, "Oh, you're Waka Waka?" And he goes, yeah. And I'm like, "I'm Waka Waka too." And then we had this conversation, and he told me about his family, and I said, "Who my family are?" And he's like, "Well, we're related. I'm related to your family." And then, so we have these types of conversations, and that's that kinship and connection side of things. And that's why when I talking about identity, so yes, I can talk about being Aboriginal, but it will come down to that point of like, well, where do I come from? Because then I can actually create those deeper connections with people.
Because it's a big land. We live on a lot of land. And I think just one thing to clarify for people, Aboriginal people, it's generally the mainland. Torres Strait is the Torres Strait, which is on the northern tip of far north Queensland. If you look up that, there's the Torres Strait, and I think it's 5 islands.
Correct. Oh, there's actually, and there's smaller scattered islands as well. And Torres Strait Islander culture aligns a little bit with Aboriginal culture, but there's a lot of alignment with Papua New Guinean culture and practices as well. So, and there's traditional trading routes between.
And people will see this on the map that we share, because I think it's vital for people to see that. But thank you so much for sharing that. Are there any other cultural protocols that you want to cover, in this initial part of our episode?
Yeah, so I think one of the other things as well is just acknowledging like our ancestors, and this is where we talk about when we do acknowledgements and welcome to countries is talking about our ancestors, our elders, and our emerging elders as well.
Yeah.
So really being able to just highlight those and the importance of those and the role that they've played in, I guess, where we're at today as a community, but then also as a society, as non-Indigenous Australia as well.
I have to say, I think the public leaders and events specifically are doing it well. Like, they're doing it often. International events, when we're hosting in Australia, but for international occasion, and it's giving people that exposure. And when people don't know about it, they ask. They ask, or they go and look it up, and they're like, oh, okay, that's great. First time visitors into Australia, and they're coming to visit or something, and there's an opening night, and people are doing a welcome to country or acknowledgement of country. I've seen when they've opened buildings, so new university campuses or whatever, they're doing a welcome to country, and they've got traditional owners coming on, and it's a great thing. It's so mesmerizing. You feel proud.
Yep.
You don't feel ashamed, thinking, we're doing everything wrong. It's like, no, this is good.
And I think that's an important thing as well, is that we all feel proud about it because it's our shared history as well, and so.
And me as a non-Indigenous person can feel proud, that we've got this cultural connection, this rich history all across the land.
Yep.
So you've coined this term, Indigenous digital economy. Right. This is what the main part of the show today. We wanted to talk about this. Can you tell us more about this concept? How and how can it positively impact Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities?
So I guess there's a few layers to the Indigenous digital economy, and I guess it's kind of come about from many different people's experiences. Particularly, I guess my experience when I finished university. I went and I landed my first job at Microsoft in the early 2000s. And at the time, I was the first Aboriginal person that ended up working at Microsoft at the time. And so didn't discover it until about 9 months into my journey, because HR had found out, there's this I was known as a contractor at the time, because that was my original role. And it's like, there's the Aboriginal guy who's a contractor. And then the whole conversation, they're like, you actually are our first Aboriginal person to work here. And I was like proud of that to be me, but I was also disappointed about the fact in the early 2000s, Microsoft had been around for close to 20 years at the time, and that there hadn't been any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people before me. My journey through that, so I saw two other Aboriginal people. So I was there for 5 years, and two other Aboriginal people came in to Microsoft. At the time, they actually came in and both left before I did.
Yeah.
And, that really had an impact on me, because I'd always felt like I was having these conversations with people and teaching a lot of people about Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander culture, but also feeling, I guess the weight of that too. And then on top of that, couple that then with feeling imposter syndrome as well. So I'd walk into this workplace that, in the early 2000s, that, they're making ways to try to understand individuals within the workplace, but there wasn't necessarily an awareness or an understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and culture. And so I was just kind of thrown into this mix. And so I felt like an imposter, because I was like, I was just kind of in that. And then so what ended up happening was that reflection of that journey, I ended up forming a charity called Indigitek. And Indigitek provides learning and career pathways for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people into STEM. And through that journey of being able to create that was a reflection of some of the stuff that I went through and some of the things that I saw, and how do we then now utilize this to create safe workspaces and safe working environments for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, so that this whole conversation around safety and work isn't a thing in the future, because it's just recognised, and not just for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but for all people of all different walks of life, that they don't have to have a safe space anymore because it's just normal that you go into it's just normalized. And so, so when we talk about, I guess, the term Indigenous digital economy, that's what it is from like a corporate career and workplace perspective. But then the other side of it as well is looking at technology and the role that technology can play in the preservation of culture in particular elements. We don't want to just say like, oh yeah, technology is a silver bullet that's going to be able to resolve, any cultural challenges or opportunities, but how does it coexist with culture in the most appropriate way so that it doesn't come in and then actually negatively affect, cultural retention, cultural practice, and those sorts of things. So our goal is to really look at the role that technology plays in communities, and then finding that balance of investing in technology in the most appropriate way, but then how that then drives also economic opportunity, economic participation, self-determination, and the role that technology, the learning around technology and the tools can actually play a role within those communities. So someone in one of those communities might be able to say, oh yeah, I want to learn more about this particular type of technology, and they can choose to learn more about it and then explore a career pathway.
And how are you seeing the traction? Because, I know you're a strong advocate for education, training, development for young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and to get into this space. How are you, how's the progress going?
It's definitely, it's not as fast as when you kind of compare it to the like the non-Indigenous market. If you kind of look at the rest of Australia, there are a lot more people, who are interested and comfortable to move into this space. What we've done with Indigitek is we've built the community, a community, and we want that to continue to grow. But at the moment, we're between 150 and 200 members at the moment, and the goal is to utilize their stories to be able to continue to push more. So it's not like talking about it from a qualifications perspective, and you need to go and have this certification, and you need to learn this specific thing about coding and these different types of platforms and languages of coding. But it's more talking about people's stories, so then someone can say, oh yeah, I want to be like Joel, for example, or I want to be like Tamina. Like people can actually say they can look up to someone, and that's the goal, right? Is to look up to, have people in our community that people can look up to, so that they can say, well, if they look like me and they've had a lived experience like me, I can also do that as well. Whereas at the moment, a lot of people in my community will work in spaces like justice, health, education, and things that are really critical components of things that we're working really hard on. But I guess the way that we look at the stuff that we do around STEM, and particularly technology, is saying, well, actually technology can lay over all of those areas. So you can actually dynamically work across all of those and utilize technology to enhance those different areas. And
this is, I guess, a lifelong mission for you. This is not a 1 year, 2 year, like you've been at this for a number of years, and we've still got a long way to go, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that passion has come from, I guess, my own lived experiences and my own journey, and knowing what some of the possibilities and opportunities are, but also historically from, the journey that my family have taken as well, when we talk about some, community culture and identity, but then also politics when it comes to mainstream politics and business as well. And so really being able to look at all of my learnings and my experiences through my life, and then how that's kind of brought me to this point of really wanting to make that change, and knowing that I'm still on that journey, and surrounding myself in my community as well with people that want to go on that journey too.
Yeah, and look, there's plenty of others that I'm sure would want to help you on this journey. So a little bit of a call to action. What can other business leaders and organizations do to help you on this path?
Yeah, it's actually quite an interesting one, because we have this this actually talks more to some of the HR side of things, is this desire for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to be hired into tech roles. And so there's this huge demand at the moment. And at Indigitek, we have so many people knocking on our doors going, oh, we're hiring for this role, we're hiring for that role. We've got all these different roles. We've got these traineeships, we've got these grad programs. And can you help us, get people in? But the talent pool isn't necessarily as large as what it could and should be. And that's again because of those historical factors which I mentioned before, that are related to the foundational elements that relate to inclusiveness of the STEM ecosystem to have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in it, but then also embedding Indigenous ways of thinking, being, doing and knowing into those ways as well. So when you potentially move into that learning and that workspace across STEM, how can I also bring my lived experiences, my knowledges and my experiences from my people, my community to be able to influence the way that a workplace or a project may evolve and develop?
Yeah. So look, there's, in my time talking to young Aboriginal students, I've come across a few different challenges. One of the challenges that I've heard directly is around for young people who are moving from community, so in regional or remote areas, and then coming to the city to study. And there's been that pressure from the family to achieve. Sometimes it's pressure from the family or community to return home. And it's also about the young person's ability to manage this. First time out of community, alone, not enough support networks. What do you think can be done to help, young Aboriginal students or young Aboriginal people who are moving to different parts of the country to succeed?
Yeah, I think the key thing, and we talk a lot about this, is understanding yourself and your identity and really being able to be connected with that. And that doesn't mean knowing your identity in terms of like, oh yeah, you're this Aboriginal person or Torres Strait Islander person, but it's more so about understanding who you are as an individual, and then where you kind of fit within, I guess, your ecosystem. And the idea behind that is to really help people connect with who they are and what their purpose is, basically, so that then gives them that drive of understanding as to why they've potentially moved off country. So that's the language that we use in community, is you live on country, which means that you live where you come from, or you live off country and you're living away from home. And so our idea is really about helping people understand that identity of who they are, so that the decisions that they make are grounded in purpose. But then I guess a way that we look at also helping people or encouraging people to cope with that as well is to connect with other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the space that you might end up moving to. But then also, how do you then connect as well with non-Indigenous people too? Because I guess I look at that from my own life perspective, and I play I play a lot of basketball, so I have like a massive network around my basketball. I play a bit of golf, so I have a network around that as well. But then I have my family, my community, and I have a network there too. And having all of those different things has helped me become who I am, but also grounds me in my comfort of who I am and what I'm doing. And we really want to be able to try to continue to push and grow that. But the other layer to that too is going back onto country as well. So it's a huge part of what we talk about, is being able to connect with your country, your family, your community and your stories, and knowing those so that you can continue to go back and refuel and reconnect. So that is something, because that is something that is a part of you. That's your connection, that's your ancestry, that's your stories, and that's made you who you are, and your the stories of your ancestors, your grandparents, your parents, down to you. And so really making sure that, as best as possible, that you maintain those connections.
Because it doesn't need to be a binary choice, like you're either on country or off country, right? It's like, no, you can always come back. Because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you, is how do you keep a connection to culture, when you're moving to a new environment? And I think you touched on it, which is reaching out to people, different people, pursue your interests. Indigitek is a good network, if you're in the tech space, finding that connection, maintaining connection, going back to visiting country. I mean, what are some other ways that you maintain connection to culture, Liam?
Firstly, I travel back onto country a lot, so I'm fortunate enough, and I know that I'm fortunate to have this. So is my connection to my country and my community and my family. Because not all people have that opportunity. You have stolen generation and the impacts of that, which has led to a disconnection of some Aboriginal people being disconnected from their families. Where I come from, particularly the Gumbaynggirr Nation, which is through my dad's line, we have strong connection to our stories, language and culture, and we're quite a fortunate community, because when you look at communities on the East Coast, a lot of them have had a lot of those bits and pieces stolen away, and they've been lost, or they're or they haven't been rediscovered. Looking through old documents and assets and things, but yeah, so we've been quite fortunate. And for me, having that, but then also continually talking to and connecting with my family and community, especially here in Sydney as well. So like the point I made before when I met that young Aboriginal guy yesterday, and being like, oh, where you from? Like those things are important as well, because after I had that conversation, and I was just like, oh, that's so amazing. Like it's just it's so great to be able to connect with a person and see like the connection that I have with them, even though that I've never met them before, and where they actually live is like 12 hours away from here. But there's that connection that I actually have with that person now.
And it's so quick. So how fast you can develop rapport when you've got something as big as that as your commonality. Because I get this when I speak to other people in Vietnamese. And so that language is that instant booster in terms of trust building. And then they'll be like, where are you from? And then I remember I was in Canberra, and there's this place where I buy lunch from, pork rolls and everything. And it turns out they're from the same hometown that my family's from.
Wow.
And then we had to ask, like, are we related? And then when we talked about grandparents, no. But that built instant rapport. And that was, almost 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And every time I'm in the shop now, we have like awesome banter.
Yep.
I think it's about asking the right questions and framing it in the right way and just being easygoing.
Yeah.
I think you're an easygoing guy. So, a lot of people would find conversation with you.
Yeah, there's a huge thing to be said for interconnectedness and the desire to want to be able to find commonality and share purpose and and history with people as well. And I think there's a lot that can be said to when talking about that point before around I guess identity is interconnectedness is a huge part of that as well.
Well, we touched earlier about closing the gap. Okay. And today we're talking about the Indigenous digital economy. You talked about closing the gap earlier, and there were some challenges around that. Let's explore that a little bit more. I want to get your point on, investment in infrastructure in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Like, what do you think is happening at the moment? What do you think needs to happen?
Yeah, I think, firstly, there just needs to be an assessment and understanding of some of the infrastructure needs and wants, and then where there's a deficit. And when we talk about these scenarios as well, we're not only talking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. This is a challenge for rural and remote communities in general around having access to infrastructure.
Yeah.
And there are things that are happening, but they do move a little bit slowly, just because of bureaucracy, resources as well. Especially given now that the world is it's a little bit difficult to get access to resources. But now we're seeing I'm hearing stories of people in communities trialing and testing Starlink. So
great.
So and I think that's a great opportunity to see with the resources that limited resources that we have access to, how do we tap into something that can actually give potentially quick access and, sustainable access or stable access, to get online. I guess the other thing as well is when we're looking at investing in infrastructure in these communities and these locations, is making sure that there's the progress in the development and learning that's happening as well. So instead of going like, oh yeah, I'm some corporate and I've got 100 laptops that I can refurbish and then I can send out to some community and then, and then we're sorted. And, I don't want to be offensive to some corporates. And sometimes they do that and they're like, oh, well, that's a massive tick in our corporate social responsibility box. It's like, well, no, because you also have to understand the needs of those communities as well. So you might actually have more of an impact sending out 5 to 10 devices as opposed to sending out 100, because then 90 to 95 of those could end up just gathering dust and doing nothing, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to actually create an opportunity for learning and development, so that you're not just dumping these devices in these or this infrastructure in these locations. You're actually building up those communities as well to be able to use that technology and that infrastructure as well.
Because that was one of the discussions we had very early on when we met, and we actually met at Supply Nation, about 5-6 years ago. Because one of the questions I asked you is, how do we train, how can we allow, enable, provide opportunities for young Indigenous people to stay in community but access tech jobs? That was one of the questions that you and I engaged on very early.
It was one of the, I guess, I don't want to say that there's like huge advantages, but it was one of the advantages of the lockdowns from COVID was that globally, but also as a country, we had to work out how to still continue to work while we're working from home and being able to leverage and utilize technology. And to the point now that I'd say that 80% of my meetings are online and 20% are in person, whereas in the past, it would have been 90% in person and 10% in online, and even that 10% that was online would feel really awkward about meeting online. So like the whole narrative is switched so much to the point that, and this is we talked specifically about this before COVID around the things that now ended up happening as a result of COVID of like the accessibility of being able to live, learn, and work on country. And now we're actually like practicing that in our day-to-day lives, and it's so normalized to actually have a hybrid setup now where you might work from home for 3 days a week and then 2 days in the office. So why can't we have the same scenario for Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people to live and work on community, but maybe pop in once a month or once every 2 months for for a week in the office, but they're still able to work out on country. Because then the value of then being able to work out on country is that you decentralize the economic opportunity firstly, but then those individuals who might work for some type of company that's based in the city, but they're working on country, other people then see them and say, oh, what do you do? They ask them questions. Oh, I like how do I do what you do? So that's that whole idea, as I said before, around
role modeling. I think that's what you're saying.
Absolutely. The whole role model idea. So the more that we actually provide these opportunities, we're actually also providing economic development within those communities as well. And it's not only Aboriginal communities that will have the economic development, it will also be the other regional and rural communities that end up having that benefit too. So it's not just an Indigenous challenge; it's a challenge that we can work with for all regional and remote communities.
One of the other things we found out is you were involved in formulating the Australia Council for Arts Digital Culture Strategy, which has an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander focus component to it. So if you could I know we've been talking about digital development, but if you can just talk a little bit more about this strategy that you helped formulate, which I hope you can talk about. But it was Priority 5, Support First Nations Digital Development. So can you give us a summary of what that means and what was the experience like for you?
So it's actually off the back of, not off the back, but through the whole COVID experience. There was actually this movement in general around digital transformation for artists in general, so not specifically Indigenous, but artists in general. And then a component within that was had an Indigenous focus, and then Indigenous focus ended up becoming an entire project in itself to really focus on Indigenous digital transformation for Indigenous artists. And what we did find was what we're identifying some of the needs for artists in locations and different locations for the different types of art forms, but what are the different types of tools that they might need to actually apply their craft and then be able to do that in an online environment and still be able to participate economically and continue to drive that whole conversation around self-determination. And so what we ended up finding through the process was a need for the investment in the infrastructure, which was quite a big thing. And one of the roles is that Australia Council can't necessarily resolve the infrastructure side of things, but they can utilize and connect and create those connections and partnerships to be able to do that. But the way that we looked at the relationship with the Australia Council and Indigenous communities was the role that Australia Council can play around being able to provide resources, networks, and connections to be able to increase and enhance the skills and knowledge to be able to digitize different forms of art. So, when we're talking about digitizing art, we're talking about how can we support an artist who might do their artwork on canvas to become a graphic designer? And then what does that then lead to? And then what is the economic opportunity or the and I put it in inverted commas, the entrepreneurial opportunity for individuals and also cooperatives to be able to go out and build their own kind of economic base and business base to sell their artworks to the world? Or, the alternative is how do we help performing artists be able to actually live stream or record their sessions and then be able to then post those, and share those with the world to continue to do their practice, but do it in an online way. Because then what ends up happening as a result is you end up being able to create something, and then you might end up having more scale and more volume to actually do that, because you don't have to travel to all these different locations and then set up a stage in an environment. You can actually do it in a single location, and then do it more often.
And I feel like with these opportunities, you have to be conscious and deliberate about providing these opportunities to Indigenous people as well. Because otherwise, as this space grows and evolve, if you don't have that economic opportunity, that involvement, there's going to be skills development, but it won't be for, young Indigenous people, for example. So I think you've got to be quite deliberate. And I'm really fascinated with your involvement in all of this, because, that's a policy piece there, right? And then you're also really practical in terms of your involvement with Indigitek and also your company, NGNY. So I want to travel back a little bit, and I want to understand, Liam, your leadership journey. Like, what's brought you here, and what's and how did you get here for this to be your focus? Because you've been a big voice in the digital space, not just specifically about Indigenous people, but generally like digital tech. Tell us about your leadership journey. Tell us about your journey.
Yeah. So my journey, and I guess using the terminology, leadership is, I guess it's been, more organic of a journey. And, we talked about this earlier around this concept of the utilization of terms like, such and such is a born leader, or we've taught this person to be a leader. But I think that you have different types of leadership skills. And for me, it's really about the journey that I've taken to learn as I've kind of progressed along. But also when I've, look at, I guess, people in my family, people outside of my family, and understanding leaders within my community, really just sitting back and watching and listening to them about their journeys and the types of traits and characteristics and attributes that they have that have kind of led to leadership. And actually, I remember one time I was sitting at this event, and my dad is a leader in our community, and he was like, in the past, very, very heavily involved in a lot of policy and like national, domestic politics and opportunity for Indigenous and non-Indigenous
trailblazer. Absolute trailblazer.
And so being able to grow up with that and see that's influenced my life. But I remember I was watching my dad at this talk once, and they were talking about what is your measure of success, and how do you measure your success? And a lot of people were talking about it in terms of like their careers and financial side of things. And then my dad said, I have a few things. So he said, how well I can impact my family and my kids in being able to do what they want to do. And then how well I can then also positively benefit my community and my people to continue to strive ahead culturally, but also, in like a domestic sense as well, from, I guess, a commercial sense or a Western sense, I should say. And that always stuck with me, because I was like listening to everyone and they were kind of like talking about those other things. And then when my dad said, I was like, oh wow, that like, those moments in your life where you hear things that really like stick with you. And, so when I kind of think of, I guess, leadership to me is something that is embedded in purpose. And so it's not like you just go out to be a leader or something and then you're just like chasing a dream to be a leader. Your leadership ends up being tied to whatever your purpose is, and your purpose might be yours. You might have a shared purpose with other people, but what is your role within that? And then how do then people actually connect with that purpose and the narrative around that purpose? And does that mean something to them as well? Because then when you build that narrative, you create a purpose or help people understand what their potentially hidden purpose might be. And so it's about like really creating that connection. And I see when people go out and they kind of just try to be leaders and try to force it, I just tend to see that people end up stumbling a little bit. So I think that leadership is actually more of an organic journey that a lot of people do take.
Because it's also about the actions and the results that you create, right? Like, I mean, you can say things to be a leader, but if your actions don't reflect any of that, people aren't going to follow you.
Definitely got to lead by example. Right? You cannot go out and kind of preach to the choir but not practice, that as well. And I think is hugely, hugely important. Actually, I always say this to people: if you have to be successful, in order to be successful, if you have to go and scrub your toilets and do everything that you can, no job is off limits. Like to be a leader, so you just have to get down and dirty no matter what you have to do.
Can we talk about your approach to learning? Because we were chatting about it earlier, and you said you gave me some examples around how you approached, I guess, university, and you took a different approach to the traditional one. Can you just talk to us about that? Because I found that quite fascinating.
Yeah. So when I was in high school, and I kind of think about the journey of my peers at the time. A lot of them were talking about, I'm going to go and do, like a law degree, or I'm going to go do like a very specific kind of degree that is, quite niche. And they might have particular nuances within those areas, but they're very niche. Yeah. And for me, I was just like, well, I still want to explore my pathways and my opportunities, and I had a general interest in doing business at the time. So I did a business degree because I was interested in that, but also because I was like, well, I know that I can keep my pathway open, because when you're, 16, 17, 18, and you're trying to make a decision about your career path, but you don't even know too much about it other than what you've learned in school. By the time you get to uni, you start to explore and go deeper, and like your lecturers and, your tutors, actual like practitioners in those spaces, and you learn more from them. And so you pick things up. And then what I would do as well is I'd actually study with students from other faculties as well. And so through that journey, I would like pick up bits and pieces of what they do and really try and understand what they were doing to help me like learn about what pathway is that it is that I want to take. So when I had like a few different things that I wanted to do, and I didn't pursue tech as a pathway, I kind of saw that as an opportunity. As I learnt in my 3 years at university, what I picked up from other people, people in my network, my connections, and then eventually, that became the pathway. I'm like, yep, I can definitely go down that pathway and feel comfortable and confident because I've also built this network as well, so that when I'm in those workplaces, I can actually call up the people who I went to uni with and be like, oh, hey, I've got this problem or this challenge. I want to throw this idea off you, So it was really about. And
you're getting a different perspective that could create an even better solution for you. Because how is this affecting how you see learning and development for future generations? Because you told me about, the need for, say, agile. Was it agile thinking?
Yeah.
And that approach instead of traditional subjects, you're saying maybe we should consider these subjects or these types of subjects. For learning.
Yeah. So the agile framework and methodology, I think, is something that should be taught in school. And so when I kind of think of the agile framework, it's a way of being able to kind of be practice and productive, not only in a workplace, and it doesn't have to just be tied to technology or engineering or project management, but it can actually be a methodology of doing things, in terms of like short sprints, failing fast, like lean methodology as well, of being able to like have an idea and then put something out there and then see how people respond to it, and then being able to like allow it to evolve, as opposed to like saying, well, I've got this big idea and this big, this solution that I think is going to work. And then when someone then kind of goes like frowns at it a little bit, like you get super upset. And that's an experience that I had in the past with a business that I was involved in. Walked into my first business, we were looking for investors, walked into a room with a couple of investors, presented the idea. And then my business partner, he wasn't upset when people would challenge the idea. He was furious. He'd walk out of meetings sometimes. And I just said, we have to have a better way of being able to do this. So instead of actually saying we've got the solution, we go on and we just hypothesize ideas and test different concepts and then see how people respond. And then they might go, oh, maybe if you morph it and pivot a little bit with this, and then you end up coming up with a solution. I think that there's huge opportunity in the world to be able to kind of think down those pathways to actually, instead of over investing, how do you take short sprints to actually come up with a proper solution? I think
this is why, really keen to follow and support your journey in terms of building the indigenous economy, digital economy. Really keen to support. So please let us know if there's anything that we can do, if there's introductions we can make or anything like that, Liam. thank you so much for all your insights so far. We're going to move now to the Fast Five section. This is where we're going to ask you 5 quick questions to learn a little bit more about you. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, I think I am.
What was your first job and why did you get it?
So it was a paper boy. I was in year 4, year 5 at the time. I always had a desire to I guess have a little bit of like kind of financial independence. It was kind of just this thing that I had as a kid. And so, and I was like, because if I want to buy something, then, I should be able to go and like work for it and earn it. And then instead of having the challenging conversation with my parents and saying, can I have a couple of bucks to go up the street to buy a drink and a lolly? It's like, well, no, I'll have my own money to be able to do that. So I always had this drive to have a bit of independence.
Respect. What's something interesting that's not on your CV?
I guess is my connection to my culture, but also so my traditional name on my Gumbangara side is Nyara, which is turtle.
Yep.
And then coincidentally on my when I was initiated into like a clan up in Papua New Guinea, my name is Talangi, and that's also sea turtle as well, and it's pure coincidence.
Well, you've got a shirt on
that has the turtle. Yep, absolutely.
You did tell me about this journey.
Yep.
Yeah. That is coincidental.
Yeah,
that's
I remember
spirit animal.
When it happened, I walked around to different members of the community and family up in Papua New Guinea. I was like, did someone talk to someone else about my connection? I call it my family as well. I'm like, did someone? They're like, no. This was just a coincidental connection.
What have you learned about leadership and working on a team that you would want to teach your younger self?
Be comfortable to stretch your comfort zone a day at a time, a week at a time. And so I remember when I was younger and I was thinking, well, what would I ever even do with my future? And just looking at the world and going, yep, I'm scared of this entire thing. Like, where am I going to even land? What I've learned is that I've been able to stretch my comfort zone a day at a time to get comfortable. If you asked me to public speak, 10 years ago, I'd walk out of the room so no one could even see me, so that I wasn't even considered to be the person who would do the talking. And so, so it's just that gradual over time being like, you know what, I'll just put my hand up and do this.
Yeah. And over time it adds up.
Absolutely.
Can you provide a highlight from working in a trusted team?
Every day with my team at NGNY. So about 9 months before COVID, we decided, because I was doing a lot of travel overseas, we decided to shut down our office. And it was purely a test to see how we would go, not having the 4 walls and seeing if we could just actually work from home. We had systems and processes built in our business to be able to do that, but we were testing those as well to see if we could break them or if they could stand the test of time. And then so what ended up happening is through that process, we ended up realizing before COVID, the trust and the connection that we had as a team and the purpose of what we were trying to achieve in our business, and how all those bits and pieces came together, the puzzle came together for us to be able to have a trusted team that continues to push ahead and move forward. And so when the whole COVID challenge came around with work restrictions, we didn't have that challenge because we'd already been set up down that path. And because being an IT-based business around using lean methodology approaches to things, it just simplified the entire process. And so everyone in the team really thinks along those lines. And so everyone just knows their role.
Great business continuity planning,
Absolutely.
Inadvertently. What would you like your legacy to be?
I guess that I was able to empower and support people in my community to be able to continue to thrive or start to thrive and then continue to thrive and then be able to then influence other people in community, and then also including in my family as well, because I think that there's a huge opportunity. I see this so much in Indigitek that there are a lot of people who have all this amazing talent, but they don't have the confidence and comfort in themselves to be able to actually allow that those skills and experiences to share those with the world. And what we do at Indigitek is we actually help people actually discover that confidence. And so some people will turn around and say, you really trained up this person to be really, I'm like, no. They were already great. They just didn't realize it. And we just help them actually untap that. And so that's really the goal of what we want to continue to do.
That's amazing. Liam, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your insights and your experiences and your journey. I'm fascinated by where you're going and the things that you're pushing. I'm looking forward to continuing to support you. So please let us know. But again, thank you so much for coming on our show.
Thank you for having me. It's been awesome.
Today's guest was Liam Ridgeway from NGNY and Indigitek. These are organisations that support the participation and success of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the tech industry. We got insight into the importance of education, training and development. We talked about the Indigenous digital economy. We also discussed the challenges of keeping connection to culture and the opportunities that Liam is helping to create in the new digital economy. You can learn more about NGNY and Indigitek on their websites, which are linked in the show notes, and you should definitely follow Liam on LinkedIn.
Thanks for listening to the HR Think Tank with Kai No. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share our podcast with your network. Check out the show notes for any resources mentioned in today's episode or visit the Verify Now website for more information.